Distinguished Professor at Yonsei University and Letty Krauss Distinguished Fellow at the School of Global Policy and Strategy and UCSD. He is the only scholar who attended all 3 Inter-Korean summits. Let me hand it over to the moderator. Please give him a big round of applause.
반갑습니다.
Hello, everyone. The topic we are going to talk about today we have this organization named the Institute for National Security Strategy. I think it is one of the best institutes in Korea which touches upon the security issues on the peninsula, and they are publishing many journals, and I think one of this topic will be also shared in the magazines. And there are a lot of books on North Korea, but I don't think all of those books are legitimate because we need to have a more new angle toward North Korea. So in that regard, I wanted to invite the most renowned experts on North Korea and relative strategy. So today we invited Mr. Lee Jong-seok, former Minister of Unification. He wrote multiple books on North Korea and North Korea and China relations. And also we have Professor Kim Sung-young, professor of the University of North Korean Studies. She has studied on the gender equality and the society as a whole in North Korea. And also we have 2 speakers from other countries. First we have Mr. Robert Collin.
You're not well dressed. Very casual.
I'm as well dressed as you are,
우리 저 로버트 칼린 선생.
Robert Collin has worked as the chief of Northeast Asian Division in CIA for more than 20 years. I think he has studied the biggest volume of studies on North Korea so far. Please give him a big hand. And we also have a participant who are here with us from all the way from Australia.
Vienna. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. What time do you have there?
It's 3:55 a.m.
No wonder why your face looks awful.
Thank you.
우리 저 루디거 프랭크 박사님은요.
Dr. Frank is from East Germany, and also he studied in North Korea. His father used to work in North Korea as well. After the unification of 2 Germanys, he has worked as a professor at University of Vienna. And before the pandemic, he visited Pyongyang several times in order to have some insight on the field. I believe he could share his insight today with us. So Mr. Robert Collin will share his stories. How much do we know about North Korea, and if the information is correct from the U.S.'s perspective, and also Professor Frank will share his idea if North Korea would be, It will be shared by Mr. Carson as well, and also Professor Frank will touch on the economy of North Korea after the pandemic. And some say that it is about to collapse, but if it's really true. And Professor Kim Sung-kyung will tell us what changes has made in the society of North Korea so far. I think the speakers today are the most renowned experts in this area.
10-minute talks, okay? I know that Rudiger, you will be using PPT, okay? But I hope that your presentation would be shorter so that we can have a much more active discussions among ourselves. Therefore, I will start with Bob Carlin. You'll give a up to 10 minutes, okay? And then that will be followed by Dr. Jong-Seok Lee about the North Korean politics, and then Rudiger Frank on economy, and Sung-kyung Kim on society and culture. Okay, we'll start. Okay, Bob, now it's your turn.
Very good, thank you, Chung-in. I'm happy to be here. I know I look casual, but I wanted to make sure that I wouldn't be too uptight as I gave this presentation, because I think it's going to be a lot of fun for the audience to hear some of the things I say. But the discussions about the role of intelligence, that's what I'm really focused on here. The discussions generally look at the collection and analysis of information, but I want us to look at things from a different perspective. And that is how the intelligence on North Korea affects policy decisions and supports or fails to support negotiations. There's a popular assumption, both in and out of government, that intelligence findings on North Korea are revealed wisdom, not to be challenged. I hope it doesn't shock anyone if I venture a simple counterstatement, and that is the product of government intelligence on North Korea is not necessarily the same thing as wisdom or even insight. Put another way, a number of senior US and ROK negotiators have said the intelligence they received to support their negotiations was problematic. And that's a problem I saw many times. For despite the acknowledged strengths of the broad sweep of the intelligence effort on North Korea, I came away from my experience as the advisor to two really superb negotiators with the conviction that there are persistent problems with intelligence that stand in the way of better and more effective policy. Now, let me hasten to add that if my observations are out of date and the problems I raise here have been completely resolved, that's wonderful, and I gladly apologize in advance. Okay, to begin, let's agree. There is no question that the combined work of a whole army of technicians and scientists and agents and communicators and analysts is absolutely vital to understanding a country which does everything possible to wrap itself in a near impenetrable fog. Given the difficulties of access to the North and secrecy with which it operates, there are going to be gaps in intelligence. That's not surprising. And it's not generally fatal. As bad as those collection gaps are, there are persistent, deep-rooted problems in perspective and analysis, and that's what concerns me. Though most intelligence professionals, when they're asked, will agree about the limitations of their craft, these limits get diluted and blurred as the findings bleed into policy and public discussion. If confidence in the conclusions can be oversold, at the other end of the spectrum, there's something equally pernicious, and that is the oft-repeated view that North Korea is an information black hole. As far as I'm concerned, in many cases, the portrayal of the North as a black hole turns out to be a form of intellectual dodginess. It's tantamount to claiming that no one knows about North Korea, and thus anyone can say whatever they like. Any policymaker who believes that has one foot in a swamp. The fact is, there are questions about the intelligence process in regard to North Korea that need to be examined not just once, but over and over and over again. These questions run the gamut. What perceptions do negotiators have when they first sit down at the table with the North Koreans? Where is the disconnect between what intelligence supplies and what policymakers and negotiators find useful or actually need? Why do misperceptions and faulty intelligence analysis persist? When does what analysts know, and I put that in quotes, know about North Korea from classified sources lead them away from what they need to learn outside the reams of the reports that cross their desks every day? And they are reams of reports, believe me. Is classified intelligence as much an anchor as a sail when it comes to understanding North Korea? And not least, how crucial is direct experience in the country and sitting with North Koreans for understanding and interpreting the range of information that we get, both classified and unclassified. Though it's not often framed this way, intelligence for negotiations differs from strategic intelligence. Strategic intelligence is the sort of thing that makes up what we call national estimates. It's sweeping in its scope. It provides big answers to big questions. Negotiators certainly need that, but the analysis that I think they need even more has to question or at least refine the findings that were reached at the strategic level. The analysis that they really need has to be more supple. Why is that? Because negotiations are actually a testing ground for intelligence. They are a rare reconnaissance foray into the thinking and the perceptions of the other side, sitting right across the table from you. Every negotiator, every negotiation is different. Different goals, different diplomatic and political context, different personalities. But no matter how smart and experienced negotiators may be, they may not at first spot key developments or be aware of key pieces of history that the North Koreans use to frame their own positions. This North Korean perspective is exactly what intelligence should supply, and too often doesn't do it well. A good red team analysis to challenge the negotiator and sharpen his views can be invaluable, but it isn't a well-developed practice in Washington. Why not? It's a good question. I think it is in part because the stereotypes that dominate thinking in Washington about the North are so deeply embedded. Fashioning a negotiating position that advances US interests is a great challenge, and much effort is devoted to that throughout the national security bureaucracy in the White House. Less attention, however, is given to an equally important task, and that is working out how the US presentation will be received, how it will be understood and interpreted and transmitted home by the North Korean interlocutors. In effect, what we need to ask ourselves is, what will the North Korean reporting cable back to Pyongyang look like? And will it effectively record and emphasize the points that we were trying to get across? The idea that all that needs to be done is to see that the North Korean side is taking accurate notes, essentially providing a verbatim transcript back home of what the US negotiator presents, I think is badly misguided. The question is not just what will the negotiator say, but what will the North Koreans hear? How will they interpret it? What will they emphasize from the presentation? How should the presentation be choreographed in a way to make it more effective as it gets into the North Korean system? North Korean negotiators come to talks with a range of options in their pocket. And as much as the US counterparts across the table have, they have the ability to maneuver. What does that mean? It means that writing off North Korean negotiators merely as letterboxes in which to drop US talking points is not a recipe for progress. What is needed for negotiations is for intelligence to be open to new evidence that may emerge from the talks. Sitting at the table, the negotiator must and will focus like a laser beam. By contrast, an intelligence officer must lean back and listen for what is new, what is different, and even what has disappeared from the other side's position. A significant silence can be as telling as an emphatically voiced demand, but listening for what is not there is not an easy skill to develop. And it's even more difficult to explain to someone once you notice what's missing from the other side. Intelligence cannot predict from a distance, no matter how much reporting it flows in, whether negotiations will succeed or how implementation of an agreement will play out. Judgments that the North will never do something, will never decide something, are not really very helpful. Intelligence judgments that negotiations with the DPRK will inevitably fail are distinctly unhelpful because they're no more than guesses, and they're granted a political weight far beyond what they deserve. A policymaker needs to know where there might be an opening, what might be possible, what path could lead around what looks to be a sheer cliff. When we were negotiating the agreed framework in 1993-94, the drumbeat of pessimism from the broader intelligence community was constant. By contrast, the State Department Intelligence Office saw the possibilities for progress. Why? Largely because it was giving weight to the evolving position on the North Korean side of the table. In the early years, when there was uncertainty about the facts of the North's nuclear program, the worst case analysis was allowed to predominate. Eventually, that proved to be a mistake. But in Washington, the focus on the North's nuclear program became almost hypnotic. There was a crying need instead for appropriate weight to be given to a strategic decision in 1991 that Kim Il-sung made to push for normal relations with the US. The analysis needed to recognize that the withdrawal of US troops from the peninsula was no longer a priority, and that the North's primary motivation was not economic. That is, that the light water reactors that pushed for in the negotiations were less for an economic payoff than for the relations with the US Pyongyang calculated would result. None of these ideas fit the general understanding in either the intelligence or the policy communities at the time. Yet they were exactly what intelligence most needed to understand, and they are the sort of thing in support of negotiations intelligence still needs to explore. 정민.
Okay, thank you. 우리 밥 칼린 선생께서 얘기.
The former U.S. ambassador to Korea once said at CIA, he worked for the CIA for more than 30 years, and I told him that while you were working at the CIA, what was the worst failure case in the intelligence? I asked him, and he answered that I actually experienced a failure in the intelligence over North Korea, and I don't believe and I don't trust the intelligence analyst for North Korea. So the reason of the U.S. lack of information on North Korea is that the analysis on North Korean intelligence is quite uh, short. And so upon Dr. Carr's presentation, I reminded of the last experience of talking with the former U.S. ambassador to Korea, reflecting upon his experiences at the CIA. And there are some classified information from the CIA side, and they are actually not really helpful for negotiation because the documents are made from the perspective of the US. So it would be a way more helpful if they make present documentations from the perspective of North Korea. That must be helpful. So at the Institution for the National Security, we publish the English brochure on the strategy for North Korea, and the introduction part is actually quoted a lot from Dr. Carr's writings. And what's most important here is the political information and power information on North Korea. And regarding this, Dr. Lee Jong-seok is the expert. So he will deliver a presentation on the politics and the sustainability of North Korean situation. And please get in 7 minutes. Nice to meet you. I made a presentation on the stability and sustainability of Kim Jong-un regime. So I will make a presentation on it. And with the theme of the sustainability of Kim Jong-un regime in North Korea, I would tell you. And I've been studying the North Korean situation for a while, and these days it's ever more important. And I feel that it's really comfortable and easy, relatively easy to study because the factors of the government must be studied from the perspective of sustainability and stability. And in order to know about changes in vulnerability or volatility of a regime, we had to check a lot of things in the past. However, these days it's quite easy to interpret the trend in North Korea, and Nodong newspaper, which is the official newspaper of North Korea, contains a lot of information from this regard. After the inauguration, since the inauguration of Kim Jong-un, North Korea has been changing dramatically. And Kim Jong-un has been in power in more than a decade, and his power is relatively stabilized compared to the initial stage. However, some are raising issues that due to the tightened international sanction, the economic difficulties are getting harder in the North Korean economy, which is making Kim Jong-un regime weakened. And that could pose a threat to Kim Jong-un regime, as some points out. However, if I compare with the former Kim Jong-il regime to Kim Jong-un regime, the situation is getting better because under Kim Jong-il, North Korean people underwent the arduous march, and these days Kim Jong-un regime seems to be sustainable, and it would be possible for longer survival. In the past, Kim Jong-il highlighted the military-first politics, and he depended upon the cult of personality, and they were the foundations of the North Korean regime, and they highlighted 주체, and that's the basic direction of the national operation. And under the crisis of the socialism collapse, they just tried to create the legitimacy based on the military first policies, and the power was quite stable. However, the foundation of the power was quite simple and outdated. Again, they were quite vulnerable to opening up of the market and the external changes. So they just keep closing their market, and they were just blocking from the external influences. On the other hand, Kim Jong-un, although he succeeded from the heritage of the cult of the personality, he is quite mitigating the cult of personality. So the same base is still existing in North Korea. However, he is turning his eyes from ideology to pragmatism and reform. And he's actually turning the idea of reform into action, upgrading the quality of life of the North Korean people. So, in the constitution of North Korea, and norms and rules of the politics are changing now from military first to people first. In other words, he is trying to secure the well-being of the people so that the legitimacy would be created. So he did not change his political line, and that's what we need to focus on. So the priority in the national resources has been funneled into the economy. So the method of operating the nation is changed from garrison state to normal state. In the economy, no one talks about North Korean reform or North Korean opening up of the market. However, in reality, he is trying to change the economic structure of North Korea. So he just encourages competition in the market. So he's trying to adopt a so-called market economy. So in the cultural sector, he's also trying to reform the sector by giving a boost to the farmers. And they don't use the term opening up. However, under a harsh international sanctions, it's really difficult to find export partner. If they manufacture a lot of products, there's no export partners. However, they are trying to establish a framework for export. So in terms of law and order, he is reforming the economic structure of North Korea. Basically, he is trying to establish a better of North Korea. Therefore, thanks to the support of the North Korean citizens, based on the upgrade in the quality of life, he is quite popular in North Korea, and he is said to be very well adapting to the changes in the external environment, and he's quite flexible in opening up of the market. That's what we call the leadership of Kim Jong-un. So his leadership is a transition from a monarch of absolute dynasty. His leadership is the combination of the monarch of absolute dynasty with the capable CEO of a modern corporation. And he's really object driven, and he's trying to realize a better off country while advocating the self-reliance. So he flew to Singapore on civil aircraft of China to attend North Korea-US summit. So although he's still advocating self-reliance, he's trying to realize his objective. So he's so pragmatic. So when President Moon Jae-in went to North Korea, he showed his attitude of pursuing pragmatical benefit by meeting South Korean president face to face. As a representative of North Korea, he welcomed South Korean counterpart. In the intra-Korea relations, sometimes unification seemed still to be a long way. However, he is trying to get a pragmatic attitude, and he's trying to focus more on the economic development. So there is a big task, and it's really hard to realize and implement the task because North Korea is suffering from lack of resource. In that case, he just drastically skipped the task. So thanks to his ambitious and drastic approach, in North Korea these days, at least no one is in hunger. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Lee Jong-seok has been really insightful, and there's nothing to add. And what he highlighted is that Kim Jong-un is totally different from Kim Jong-il because of his pragmatic attitude toward the economy, and the sustainability or the potential of the survival of the regime is quite high.
It's falling apart? Or are we going to see the demise of North Korean economy sooner or later? According to very recent NK news, there was a very gloomy projection on the North Korean economy. What is your take on that one?
Well, I suppose it's my turn now. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for giving me a chance to share some of my thoughts with you on the North Korean economy. What I will try to do is look at the current situation and also ask, what does this really mean in terms of North Korea's future? Because I suppose this is what we are all most worried about. And I will do so based on the comprehensive reform equation model, which I'm going to explain a little bit later. Okay, so first of all, I think terminology is quite important. We've already touched upon this a little bit. I think we need to be aware that depending on what definition you use, not every change in economic policy is actually a reform. I follow Janos Kornai, who is one of the eminent scholars of state socialism, and he actually has this nice term of perfection measures. And I think most of what we've seen in North Korea so far is really that. It's trying to make the system work, not replace the system by a new one. And there are some key elements that need to be affected before we can call a change an actual economic reform. And frankly, I haven't seen much of those. I would also like to add that, as we've seen from evidence from the past, like in China and Vietnam, for example, but also in the Soviet Union, where Mikhail Gorbachev started out by announcing perestroika and glasnost, an announcement by the top leader, especially in an autocratic system, is absolutely essential. And I'm not talking about reading between the lines, but the actual explicit announcement that now we are going to reform, like Deng Xiaoping did it when he talked about reform and opening. This is essential for bureaucrats to know that reform is now really a policy that is supported by the central authority. Unless there is such an announcement, it will be very, very difficult to actually have real reforms. So what we have seen in North Korea really are changes in economic policy. I have a short list here. I think you're aware of all of them, and this is by far not complete. All those are perfection measures, and I would include the field responsibility system in agriculture and also the socialist enterprise responsibility management system, both having been introduced under Kim Jong-un, so far really under perfection measures and not as actual reforms, because they do not affect the key elements of the socialist system. They are not sufficiently broad and they are not sufficiently deep. And there has been no public announcement by the North Korean leader of any reform. Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un's father, got relatively close in January 2001 when he, in an article in the Nodong Shinmun, wrote about that. But this is about it. So from Kim Jong-un, we still have to wait for this. So let's assume there were no reforms in that sense so far. Is this going to change in the foreseeable future? And in particular, is the current situation of North Korea's economy a catalyst for reforms? Well, I think you are all aware that North Korea's economy is suffering from a number of crises. A combination of long-term structural crisis coming from the actual features of the socialist system, combined with the midterm and the short-term challenge arising from economic sanctions, and now most recently the COVID pandemic. There are numerous qualitative and quantitative indicators that tell us this. Just two here, just as examples. Trade of North Korea dropped. North Korea's state budget has dropped, and you could add the Bank of Korea estimate of North Korea's GDP, which is also going down a lot. You might disagree on the actual value in the single indicators, but the trend of all indicators is going down. This, combined with reports we get from North Korea on the ground, is not very encouraging. So I think we can all agree that North Korea is in an economic crisis at the moment. So what is the North Korean leader's reaction to this? Is it reforms? No, it is not. If you look at Kim Jong-un's speech given at the Joseon Norongdang Party Congress, or the Korean Workers' Party Congress, you see that his strategy is inward oriented. He focuses on import substitution and on strengthening the state. Most importantly, he has announced no new reforms or economic policy changes. On the contrary, we see a tightening also of ideological control and political repression. So the problem we have here, that all our concerns can only be resolved if there will be reforms, but we do not see any reforms so far. So what can we do? What can external actors, like for example the Republic of Korea, do to help promote reforms in North Korea? And for that purpose, I have this model here, which does something that the previous speakers mentioned. You need to break down the complex problem of North Korea itself, or reforming North Korea, into manageable sections. And the model does so by looking at 8 variables. These 8 variables are the number of supporters and of reform and their relative power. Those are issues that you can deal with separately, and you can ask yourself, for example, if you issue an economic sanction, does it have an impact on the number of reform supporters? Does it change their relative power? Same goes for non-supporters. Also, you can look at the cost-benefit analysis of certain measures related to reforms. Does it increase the perceived gains from reforms or not? Does it perhaps increase perceived losses from reforms? And so on and so on. And you can apply those 8 variables to North Korea in a much more sophisticated way. There is no North Korea. North Korea is a country of 25 million. It's a very complex society. So I think we should really stop talking about North Korea, and we should talk about parts of that society. Now, I have one way of doing this here on my slide, looking at the leader, the elite, the middle class, and all the others, which I call the people. You could also look at, for example, state, military, and party. Or you could look at people living in cities and people living in the countryside. Or you can look at farmers and non-farmers and so on. That doesn't matter. But what we really need to do is break down this very complex issue into smaller, manageable sections, because this will definitely improve the quality of our debate. Now, I have done this, and obviously I don't have time to go through all that, but this is how an outcome, for example, of this model could look like. And I think the outcome is actually very interesting, because in a way it is not what is done by many governments when it comes to attempting to promote change in North Korea. You see the elite and the middle class are the most prospective in terms of dealing with them. And you see that the increase of perceived gains from reforms and also the increase of perceived losses from non-reform are the most promising issues that we can deal with. This can be, by the way, also used to understand the behavior of the North Korean leadership, and this inward orientation, state control strengthening, and also crackdown on the ideological front actually seems to imply that the North Korean leader's analysis of his own system is exactly like the one you've just seen. It's just that, of course, his goal is not to promote reforms, but the other way around. If we would try to, for example, change the perspective of the elite, we could promote the successful cases of China and Vietnam and show to the elite that they actually have a lot to gain. We can tell them that they do not have much to lose by using very successful examples. And, you know, you don't have to make this up, you just have to inform them. For sanctions, I think one problem with sanctions is that they have the wrong target. We should make economic reform a goal of the sanctions and not direct denuclearization. Denuclearization might follow from a change of system through reforms. And I guess in the long run, this is a more successful model, actually. The same goes for the middle class and also for the people. And then I have a quote here that in a way reflects my own experience as a citizen of East Germany. That is, many people are not aware of the origin of the problems that they see on a daily basis. They see that many things are not working properly in North Korea, but they do not really understand why that is the case. So I think and information is very important in this regard, and this is what we should focus resources and our efforts on. So my time is almost up. You see my conclusions here in a nutshell, and I'm really looking forward to having a more detailed discussion, but roundabout, this is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rudiger. Very illuminating presentation. We have a lot to discuss. Now, I will turn to Professor Sung-kyung Kim on the North Korean society and culture.
It's my great pleasure to be part of this panel, and I prepared just a couple of slides to explain my papers. I would like to talk about the North Korean society and culture, and the presentation title I was given is North Korean society and culture is changing. Of course, my answer would be it has been changing a lot, and it will change, same as any other countries. Before really analyzing North Korean society, I would like to bring in the couple of the key concepts and the theory I'm really relying on. I'm interested in this relationship between the emotion and politics. And as we know, that is many countries now experiencing this rise of emotion and facilitating the emotions for the politics. And the North Korean regime is exactly the same, and perhaps containing very populistic features and operationalize the emotions such as fears, anger, joy, and sadness in very effective way. And North Korean readers have constructed in their own way of presenting the strong identification with the people, of course, using emotion. And also, they do have this very diverse medium of bringing the affect to the people. And so I'm interested in how North Korean people feel the readers from Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un. And from my interview and also the interview with the other experts, North Korean migrants, they often express very nostalgic feelings towards the great leader Kim Il-sung. And many have been even suggest that this arduous march would have resulted in far different outcome had Kim Il-sung been alive. On the other hand, Kim Jong-un regime has often characterized as hopelessness and painful due to its ruthless operation of military-first policies. So I think that is very important. They feel that Kim Jong-un, they have very negative images and feelings about Kim Jong-il. But during the arduous march and market is widespread, and the growth of grassroots market has changed a lot. And from 2010, I think it is very crucial moment. I think the marketization is happened in around the 2010. So during the 2000 is probably, we could see that it's the rise of the number of the market, but this marketization is meaning in here is that the market's logic and system is dramatically embedded every corner of society in every day of North Korean people and North Koreans' lives. So in that crucial moment is Kim Jong-un gained the power. And when I met in North Korean migrants in South Korea, lots of them is they show there's high expectations towards Kim Jong-un. And also it's kind of the aspirations. Kim Jong-un probably bringing the economic reform for us. And also is Kim Jong-un even show that it's kind of another almost sign of the new time and new age for the North Korean society. So it's bringing the liberalization and bringing the real marketization, bringing the new type of society for North Korean people. So what Kim Jong-un did for the last couple of years is probably the good example and evidence. I feel that, and also I analyze that is what Kim Jong-un did is actually is kind of effort to match the people's desires. For example, the big construction project is Ryomyeong Street and Pyongyang Scientist Street, and also the new type of the cultural experience, like 3D light show and the musics and etc. etc. But the situation wasn't that great, and Kim Jong-un had to deal with the international sanctions and natural disaster, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic. So he's having really struggling, and then so he tried to bring in this sort of almost the performance and showing that he's doing his best, and also the people is the most important part, and we are taking the people is the priorities, etc. and etc. But as I mentioned, that this North Korean society has changed, and also is still in the process of being changed. And market is everywhere. I mean, we are still pretty low data. It's like a 436 market, but it's a lot. And it's not only just number, but as I mentioned, that this marketization is even changed this clear distinction between the planned economy and the market system. So it's becoming kind of hybridized form of economy, and also it's hybridized form of the society. And I think one of the good examples is Kim Jong-un mentioned about 18 sort of contributor for the Samjiyon city constructions in last year in 2020. And I think it's these named people is probably the Donju, so-called Donju, is North Korean capitalist. So it's showing that even the national kind of big project cannot be completed without the capitalist contributions. And of course, North Korean people enjoy new ways of life, widespread of the mobile phone. Now, supposed to be about 30% of North Korean people having the smartphone, and the high level of the mobilities. And it's not only just mobile phone and the mobility, but it's meaning that it's stretching the information and financial network. And this, with the more information, with the more finance flows, is people start to have this very high level of the consumeristic desire and market-minded behavior. So these are kind of pressurized regime to do something. I think I suspect that is the reason why the Kim Jong-un is actually into the negotiation table in 2018 is probably this internal pressure is one of the very important factor. And also the Kim Jong-un introduced some more liberal policies as well. But however, the pandemic happened. I think the pandemic is a very crucial point we have to bear in mind. And I think the North Korea, because of this no deal from the Hanoi summit, is Kim Jong-un is suffer from this domestic and this authority issues as well. So Kim Jong-un regime seems to be taking this opportunity to return to kind of the old way of ruling the countries. So it's taking the COVID-19 as a kind of state of exceptions or state of the emergencies. And kind of in the short term, it might be a great opportunity for the North Korean regime to tackle in a couple of the domestic issues. And in particular, I think North Korean regime in these days really focusing on the North Korean women who is the key agency for the market economy, and also North Korean youth. You know, in 20s and 30s, they do probably they tend to be more rebellious, and they're more open to the foreign cultures and the new technologies and so on and so forth. So the government put extra effort to control the women and youth in these days. Then what about the possible path in the post-COVID-19 era? And we learned that from yesterday's sessions, and the economic condition is worsened. The food situation is probably very dreadful. The Kim Jong-un is actually confessed. And the border is still closed. And the regime is facilitating just more and more labor work from the adult, including women and the youth. But in short term, I think probably the regime did not have much choices, just implementing the controlling system. But however, given all I described, and given all this change the character of the society, North Korean society and economy, this kind of tighter control cannot really last for that long time. So I would like to finish my last slide. As I mentioned, I'm really interested in this emotion, and I'm just curious why Kim Jong-un is crying in this 25th anniversary of the ruling Workers' Party. And I feel that he's really carefully calculated this impact of his tears, and he's really apologetic to the masses, and revealing his pain and love, and try to draw the more sympathy and encourage the patience from the people. And of course, I'm not political scientist, so I can't really define the key characteristic of his regimes, but whatever we define in Kim Jong-un regime, but one thing is for sure, that is he has been working very hard to gain this consistent support of the North Koreans and attract advocates by all possible means. So I finish my presentation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Everyone has been very, very punctual. Okay, let me turn to Bob. What is your assessment of North Korean studies by American academics? In South Korea, we have some concern and reservation about so-called North Korean specialists in Washington, D.C. Because you talked about the intelligence community. How about the academic community in the United States? I hope you can give us very candid opinion on that one.
Oh, thank you for setting me up again. I think we need to be training a whole new cadre of experts. I think a lot of the veterans were pointed in the wrong direction. Look, they're smart people. I like them. They're my friends. So I don't want to get into personalities. But I do think that a lot of the work was misdirected. And I think we need a new cadre. We're starting to see new people come in. I think they have really interesting, fresh perspective. I think it's very good. I think some of them would respond and emulate the sort of presentation that we just heard. It needs to be tempered. Young people still need to get some real experience, but it's like dealing with North Korea, not just have it be a cerebral experience. So I think we're in a period of transition. Us dinosaurs are on our way out. There's no question about that. And so I'm hopeful we can be training this new cadre to come in over the next several years. I know Rudiger has students, and I'm sure they're benefiting from his experience and his input, and I hope he's able to do the same thing.
But you're saying that you have a big expectation on new cadres, but that you are very skeptical of old cadres who have been analyzing North Korea.
All I can say is I tend to disagree with much of what's written. For whatever reason, I think that a lot of people had misperceptions and they never were able to see beyond them. you know, it's pretty, I guess it's like that in Seoul. The arguments get very personal and ugly, and it's not very useful when they reach that level. It needs to be kept at an intellectual level, and North Korea just excites sometimes the worst tendencies in people. And so you get these ferocious arguments that don't help reveal, that don't help cast any light on anything.
No, what is really interesting is if, for example, if you read the Becoming Kim Jong-un or the North Korea, the impossible state, and if you look at those kinds of literature, there are very little citations from North Korean sources and also South Korean expert in North Korea. Therefore, I wonder, how without citing Korean sources, how can they make, the proper analysis of North Korean, society, politics, and foreign policy?
Well, without doubt, if you're not using North Korea, if you don't understand North Korean sources, if you don't, too many people just do cherry picking. They find a few sentences that they like from a speech, and then they use that to reinforce whatever preconceptions they had. There is not enough sober, careful, systematic, methodical analysis of North Korean public statements and newspaper articles, things like that. It's a very hard thing to do. It's very time consuming, and it's not something that Americans have been especially strong at doing. I think that's true.
The American intelligence community has been failing. American academic community has been failing. No wonder why American policy in North Korea has been failing. Do you agree with it or not?
That's part of the problem.
That is part of the problem. You admit it.
That's part of the problem. But there's a question of political leadership as well. And unless the leadership is committed to making progress, it doesn't matter what they're being told by experts or advisors or anything.
But there is a rumor that the Biden administration, when they produce a policy review on North Korea, I heard that you and some other so-called who are real experts in North Korea were consulted it. Is it true or not?
That we were consulted?
Yeah, Bob Collins was consulted by the Biden administration folks when they work on the policy review on North Korea.
If I wasn't awake when I did it, because I'm not aware that I was.
Very interesting. Without consulting you, they come up with very, very meaningful policy review. But anyhow, it is classified, but we do not know what is in it. Okay. Now let me turn to Dr. Jong-Suk Lee. You defined, 한국말로 할게. 우리
Let me speak in English. Let me speak in Korean. So you mentioned that Kim Jong-il regime is more like a pragmatic regime. But the problem here is Kim Jong-un is not addressing any issue, no economic issue, inter-Korean relationship, DPRK-US relationship, none has been addressed. But still, do you think this regime can be stabilized? How can you make such a judgment that Kim Jong-un regime has no progress in terms of problem solving? But they set the economic target, but the target has not been met. However, in the process, they made a lot of effort in various sectors, including science and technology, when it comes to the opening of market, it's not easy for them to proceed with it because of the sanctions and also the denuclearization negotiation and other inter-Korean negotiation. There are a lot of uncontrolled variables. So I think it's unfair for you to say like that. So you mentioned so far there was no significant reform trial in North Korea. However, the analysis, such an analysis, I cannot agree with that, first of all, and I'm afraid we are missing a part here. The regime has their own plan, and the previous plans were also in place. But after the 8th Party Congress, in the middle of highlighted sanctions on North Korea, whether the North Korean regime will go with the current attempt to develop their economy or just they will give up on the economy because of the sanctions. I think this was the biggest part we should be concerned of. However, economy-wise, there was no change at all when we saw the result of 8th Party Congress. Kim Jong-un is trying to maintain his policy on economy, so eventually, of course, we have to consider the U.S. as a key player, and they are putting sanctions on North Korea for many reasons. However, these sanctions are being played as obstacles for the development of their economy. So the innovation policy that North Korea is trying has to be encouraged by external players, including the U.S. So anyways, Kim Jong-un is trying hard to succeed his innovation despite many obstacles, but I believe he has consistency. But political leaders always set ideal target, but the residents do not realize the value of such target. So he has this great target, and for the people, he makes pragmatic approach, but I don't see any tangible achievement. I don't think so. As other presenters said, there has been many outstanding changes in the people of North Korea. However, with the pandemic, they started to struggle again. Despite such difficulties, the culture and communication have upgraded. If Kim Jong-un is really pragmatic leader, if that's the case, I think Kim Jong-un should start inter-Korean dialogue first. And President Moon is continuously requesting North Korea to resume their dialogue. However, they are making no reply at all. So yeah, that's true according to your calculation. However, it's a different story from Kim Jong-un's perspective. So North Korea stopped their testing of nuclear arms, and there has been no armed conflict between two Koreas. And anyways, North Korea is trying to keep promises to some extent. So I'm afraid we should not set the extent where, to this extent, North Korea has to make innovation. So from your perspective, North Korea is insufficient in making progress. However, if you see the progress over the last few decades, there has been many outstanding changes in the society, but not reached the level we can be satisfied with.
Particularly after 8th Party Congress, Kim Jong-un has been emphasizing the importance of the unified, guidance role of the state leadership over the economy. Okay. Now, as Minister Lee pointed out, then some American observers have been arguing that the North Korea is returning to old Stalinist, party-led economic management. Do you agree with that observation?
Well, I'm not sure whether I like the comparison, but as a matter of fact, Kim Jong-un is facing a crisis and he has two choices, right? If you have a problem, you can either attack or you can entrench. And I think he really has chosen the entrenchment option. He is not taking the bull by the horns and says, we have a problem now, the only way to go is forward. So let's be bold and let's forget about what we've done in the past. Let's try something new. This is not happening. And we have very clear evidence of that. He is trying to return to things that remind us indeed a lot of the past, also in terms of wording. Whether this is forever or whether it's just a short-term way to mitigate the current crisis, this is something that is very difficult to say. But as I mentioned in my presentation, Kim Jong-un has been continuing many of the things that were started under his father, but he has not really reached a new level, qualitative level yet. But he is a young man, so maybe we will see some of that in the future.
You described that Chairman Kim Jong-un has been pursuing import substitution strategy, ISI strategy. But in order to pursue ISI, you need the inflow of raw materials and capital goods, intermediate goods, right? Otherwise, you cannot pursue ISI. That is why Latin American countries, many, even Asian countries, have been pursuing ISI, during which they import a lot of so-called capital goods abroad. But in North Korea doesn't have a hard currency. Second, because of sanctions, they cannot have any access to the intermediate goods and capital goods. How can North Korea be successful in ISI?
This is the big tragedy, I think, of the last 20-something years. Also, I think one of the biggest failures of the West when dealing with North Korea. ISI, as import substitution, industrialization, is part of the East Asian model of economic development, right? The other component would be export promotion, and usually they go hand in hand. But North Korea has been locked out from participation in international economic exchange, more actually. So in a way, we are forcing North Korea back into this inward orientation. I don't want to overemphasize that point because it takes two to tango. And of course, it's also a decision by the North Korean leadership. But frankly, I don't think they have too many choices. We only leave China to them as the only economic partner. And we know that a lot of trade is taking place officially and a lot is taking place unofficially. Even those numbers have been going down. North Korea is in an advantageous position because they have many natural resources themselves. They just have difficulties getting them out of the ground. But of course, they don't have crude oil. And as you mentioned, they are also lacking technology. So they need this kind of import of technology to promote any type of industrialization. And that's why I said we need a change of paradigm away from a direct attempt at denuclearization and more towards a promotion of economic opening and reform in North Korea.
Finally, really, I was somewhat dubious of your concept of the middle class in North Korea. I understand North Korea has a leader, North Korea has elite, and North Korea has a people. But I don't see any place for the middle class because in North Korea does not have a civil society. Without having civil society, how can North Korea have a middle class? And how would you define middle class? Who are the component parts of the middle class?
I think you're asking exactly the right question. How do I define middle class? When I was in North Korea for the first time in 1991, the whole society looked very homogeneous to me. The last time I was there was in 2018. And in those 27 years, really North Korea has changed substantially, especially when it comes to the composition of society. I would define middle class as people who are not part of the core power elite, but who do have, especially through their economic, but also maybe administrative influence, a certain power within the system. Like you had the Jung-in or the middle people during the Joseon dynasty in Korea, right? There is even a way to quantitatively measure them because there is a number of 5 to 6 million mobile phones in North Korea. And I would roughly use this as a proxy to estimate the size of that group. I differentiate between old middle class and new middle class. Old middle class would, for example, be a party secretary or something, like a leader in the old system, or something like a department head in a ministry in North Korea. New middle class would be the donju that have been mentioned so far, but also the many people who, through doing business, very often women, were able to acquire a certain influence and power in their society. And if you travel to North Korea, if you go on the ground, which Bob Collin has emphasized, and I can only support that, you see the self-confidence that these people have. And that is new. I haven't seen that 30 years ago, and it very clearly comes from the monetization and marketization that we have been observing in North Korea actually since around the year 2000, like first Inter-Korean Summit. That's when we've seen these things moving up. The July 2002 economic measures, I think, were a very important stepping stone to that. So yeah, in a nutshell, that would be my analysis of that.
But this issue really related to the Dr. 성경 Kim. 김 박사는 영어로 하는 게 좋아, 한국말로 하는 게 좋아? 응?
Dr. Kim, do you prefer English or Korean? Let me speak in Korean. So we're talking about middle class in North Korea. Donju, the new middle class. In most cases, the new middle class are wives or daughter-in-law from the leaders on the party. So can you make any comparison? So our perspective has only two sides. We need to think about if this direction is right. So the regime based on the party has a strong force, and on the other side we have the market-oriented power as well. And this progress has evolved a lot, and most people have smartphones these days in North Korea. But we should be cautious about the notion that the market economy will expand further and young people in North Korea will change their ideology all of a sudden. We should not just assume that these changes in young generations will change their ideology all of a sudden. But when you explain about the changes in North Korean society, the penetration of smartphone and changes in thought, the advent of donju and 장마당 in North Korea, however, when we saw the 8th Party Congress, so there was the oppression towards anti-socialism was mentioned. I find it has kind of contradictory relations between these new changes and the attempt of the party to suppress these changes in society, including K-wave, which is culture of South Korea. What's your take on that? I think the current situation I think this is the state of emergency in the version of North Korea. So North Korea cannot make economic innovation at the moment. However, the failure in Hanoi summit must have undermined the power of Kim Jong-un as well as the expectation of the people. So under the circumstances, Kim Jong-un regime is trying to take advantage of the crisis. As you all mentioned, there have been many changes in their society. So I think in order to maintain the society, the current methodology is not correct. And when it comes to K-culture wave, in fact, not only Korean cultures, but also Chinese cultures are widespread in North Korean society. And many North Korean people are saying that they want the life quality just as Chinese have. So I think North Korean regime is trying to coordinate the current status in the short term at least. So it's impossible for any political leader to go against this big wave of society. And the international society, including South Korea, should be able to engage in the changes in the society. Do you have any other idea on that, Professor Lee?
We always talk about the revolution from above, and there is the impact from the revolution on the society. I would like to ask you a question on the direction of the revolution pursued by Kim Jong-un. Is it just like accepting the change? I believe that's the combination of both. So the revolution from the bottom is required as of now because the citizens of North Korea cherishes the importance of revolution, and that just meets the need of Kim Jong-un himself. So as you mentioned before, the changes trend into capitalism is quite a nervous topic still in North Korea. However, it is not that North Korea is just a hate capitalism. It's just like the blocking the elements or the facts that will trigger some threats to North Korean society. So it's not that Kim Jong-un would like to control the market itself. He just wants to lock down its society from the wave of Korean pop culture. So he pursues the market economy. So the news that he's suppressing the market economy is not true. I can demonstrate by this that there is a big city of Yanggangdo, and there is a province of Jiangbai of China, and there is a youngster who took pictures of North Korea from the border city of China, and in the picture there are a lot of markets normally operated, and there are some small shops that are locked down. However, it's not that they are locking down the market. It's just seizing the operation of a small shops in the market. So it's partially shut down. It's not like totally controlling the market. He's just afraid. Kim Jong-un is just afraid of the tide from the South Korea on the pop culture. So he's just trying to pursue the trend of opening up the market.
Chairman Kim Jong-un doesn't have any intention to reverse the process toward the reform. Maybe, Bob, are you hearing me? I can hear you. Unmute.
Okay, I'm on. Was that a fully formed question or just an observation?
No, Joe, you can make it. I talked about several contradictions in North Korea. What is your take on those contradictions in North Korea?
I think up until certainly up until Hanoi, even a little bit subsequently, he was on one vector on his economic policy. COVID and the floods and the economic problems really seem, as other people have said here, presented him with a new set of problems, and he is, at least for the moment, moving backwards. I don't know if you read the letter that he sent to the women's union meeting. It is incredibly conservative. I was really astounded by it. I don't believe he wrote it. I believe somebody put it in his hands. But it's a very conservative approach in terms of the society, and it's going to have big implications throughout because women are so powerful at that level in North Korea. So I have to agree with those who see this as at least a temporary step backward, and it may be more than that. It may be when they come out of COVID And they may not come out of it anytime soon. When they come out of it, it'll look like a very different place.
Rudiger, do you have anything to add on this issue?
Yes, of course. I think we should be really careful. I have been very enthusiastic in terms of talking about the changes that happened in North Korea in the last 20 years. And again, as I mentioned, they have changed North Korea's society, and I strongly agree with the observation also by Professor Kim as she made them today. When it comes to markets operating in North Korea, we should be careful not to interpret that as already a change of the system. We will see a change of system if the Kim Chek iron works have been privatized. We will see a change of the system if there is no more central planning, if enterprises can decide what they produce and they can sell it at prices that they want. We will see a change of the economic system if management of the economy is basically decentralized, and not just in one or two cases, but on a broader scale. I'm not saying that this is never going to happen, but right now it is not happening. And I think part of the reason is the current economic situation. And this is where we as external players can really help. I mean, we can create an environment where Kim Jong-un will feel safe enough to proceed with his experiments. We know from the experience of China and Vietnam that success breeds success. So you take an incremental step, see whether it works. If it works, you move on. And yeah, but again, I agree with Bob that right now the situation is very gloomy and doesn't give much reason for optimism in the short term.
Thank you very much. 결국 이런 것 같습니다. 북한.
So in a nutshell, the North Korean society is changing under the Kim Jong-un regime. However, there are a lot of challenges. In particular, last year, they were dealt a heavy blow because of COVID-19, flood, and international sanctions. So the challenges are growing a lot. And if the attitude would be maintained, then they will overcome the challenges. But to this end, the economic problems must be solved, and the inter-Korea relations and the North Korea-U.S. relations must be improved. Then Kim Jong-un will turn his dream of an ideal society come true. So it's not a short-term issue because it's not like drastically changing at fast pace. So the society is rigid itself, so it will take some time to get tangible improvement. Okay, thank you about your input. It was really insightful. Thank you a lot.
수고 많았어요.